listening from in this big world of ours. This is Michael Cross here with another episode of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. And I think tonight you're going to really, really enjoy our guest. Before I get in, though, to our guest, I want to remind people if they want to watch previous shows, go to my YouTube station at Michael Cross. And it's the Michael Cross that'll come up, Freedom from Conscience, my book series, or you can check out my website at michaelcross.net. Now, speaking of websites, fantastic website out there, that's run by Michael Snyder, who is our guest tonight. Mike, hello, and welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me on.
Well, I've been wanting to get you on here because, you know, I came across your website, The Economic Collapse, and I'd encourage people, I'm going to encourage people throughout the show, go to Google and type in The Economic Collapse and read the articles. You'll find that this website covers everything, economics, foreign policy, even transhumanist type stuff. And, I've seen your website quoted in forums. It's all over, your articles are all over Facebook for those that are politically active. They're often quoted. Tell us a little bit about your website and what got you going here and what got you really active in trying to reach out with
in terms of what I do, back a number of years ago, I worked as an attorney right in the heart of Washington, D.C. My wife and I, we lived across the river in Northern Virginia, and every morning I would get up and head over. She would drop me off at the metro station. I would take the metro over into D.C., and I worked right down on the heart of K Street as an attorney. As I was working there, I was just an average Joe. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared who I was, but I was just trying to make a living, make a paycheck, but I was becoming increasingly distressed about the direction of our country, the corruption I was seeing all around me, where things were going. And so I thought, what in the world could I possibly do to make any sort of measurable difference? And so I tried a couple different things. Eventually I heard about blogging. And at the time, there were already over 1 million other blogs. So I thought, why in the world would anyone want to read what I had to say? But I tried it out. And at first the audience was very, very small. You could have measured it with a microscope, but I stuck with it. And I kept working on it. And eventually the audience grew. And then in 2009, I started the Economic Collapse blog. And it really struck a chord because at the time, we had the Great Crisis. Millions of people had been losing their jobs. We had seen, millions of foreclosures and people were hurting, and they knew they weren't getting straight answers from the mainstream media. So they were searching out alternative sources of information, and they wanted someone to tell them the truth. And so that's what I've sought to do on my websites. And so the audience has really grown. Today, the Economic Collapse blog gets over 1 million page views a month. And then my other primary website, endoftheamericadream.com, gets over 500,000 page views per month. But in addition to that, my articles are picked up and reproduced or linked to or distributed through dozens of other very prominent websites, some much larger than my own, and all over the world. And so my articles are seen countless numbers more times on those websites. In fact, my articles are seen far more off of my websites than on my websites. So, just an average Joe, just an average citizen like me from my home in the mountains of Idaho, I can touch people literally all over the world. It still amazes me, but that's the power of the internet. It gives people like me, people like Michael Cross, the ability to touch people all over the planet.
Yeah, I think I recently, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I saw an article that you had written that was reprinted in the Russian press.
Yes. Some Russian news outlets pick up my articles. In fact, all over the world, people translate them and distribute them. So it's really amazing to see the reach of what I do. It's very humbling.
Yeah. I just really encourage people listening right now. Start a blog, get information out there. Even if you reach one person a day, that's 30 a month. Now think about that. That's 30 people that might read the stuff that you write. So stick with it as Mike has done. There's probably times you thought about just quitting, but then you just kept on, and now look where you're at.
It's very true. And each of us has something we can contribute. Not everyone is a writer, but some people, they do amazing things with YouTube videos. And I think, I wish I could do that. But they're reaching millions of people on YouTube with their videos and doing an amazing job. Other people, they write books, or they host radio shows, or they organize street protests, or, there's countless ways that people can contribute, and all of us working together can make a tremendous difference.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I don't think most people really do realize that if we think of media, just media alone, as the news, the TV shows that you see on the networks, the books from the publishing houses, the movies you see when you go at the theater, those are almost all owned by 6 giant corporations. Isn't that correct? 6 giant corporations.
That's correct. More than 90% of all the media, the video games, the DVDs, the television, everything is owned by just 6 giant media corporations. So they really dominate and control what we think about, what we talk about with people we go to school with, at work, conversations with our coworkers, even around the family dinner table. We're talking about a sporting event we saw, or a television show that's coming up, or something we saw in the news. And so the Washington Post recently came out, and they said that the average American watches 293 minutes of television a day. 293 minutes of television each day. And so that's almost 5 hours of television a day. And then when you add in video games, and we're plugged into our cell phones, listening to the radio, when you add in all sorts of electronic devices, it comes to approximately 10 hours per day that the average American is plugged into what I call the propaganda matrix.
Yeah.
And so we're being constantly fed all this information all the time. And it's the agenda, really, of the elite. And so that's why I'm encouraged by the growth of the alternative media, because that way people are, breaking this conditioning and getting alternative sources of information.
Yeah, and it's really fantastic that, I think some people dismiss this as like conspiracy, and they think of like an X-Files situation with like the smoking man sitting there with 6 or 7 people in charge of everything. But I think that when you really think about it, America is broken up into social strata. There's subgroups and so forth based on economics. And the group that owns the media is like the 1% of the 1%. And then the people that give you the news at the national level, they're paid millions of dollars. Not, per, many of these people that you think, oh, they're just like a regular person like me, and they're getting millions of dollars a year to propagandize. I don't think most Americans really aware of that.
Oh, they really are. And that's why you see the same commercials on all the networks, because the elite are paying for the commercials, for the airtime for their pharmaceutical companies and everything else. And then the version of the news you get is pretty much the same wherever you turn in the mainstream media, although maybe on Fox News they're urging you to root for the red team, and some of the other networks are urging you to root for the blue team, in terms of politics. But in essence, the flavor of the version or what the things they're talking about, it's all the same, wherever you turn. The television shows sound the same, and so, yeah, and really the elite, they argue among themselves a little bit, but really overall their agenda, their worldview, their outlook is pretty cohesive. And it's not only just communicated through the media, but also through our education system. Virtually every university across the nation, a college education today is really just, I believe, is vastly overrated, number one. But number two, you get 4 years of propaganda of basically education that the elite wants you to have into their worldview. So it's really, I think the effect that all this has on us is far greater than most of us would dare to imagine.
Yeah, I think it's ironic that the generation that we think of as the question authority generation of the 60s, people that became adults during the 60s and maybe the early 70s, they turned into the obey authority people once they got into power. You know, the people like Bill and Hillary Clinton, you know, you look at the pictures when they were in college, they look like kind of hippies, you know, bucking the system. And now they are totally the system, you know, and you will obey it or else.
Oh, it's very true. And, you know, we've got this political correctness where it's been so ingrained in us that Americans know, okay, you're not supposed to use this word, you're supposed to use this word. And, oh, you know, and so this entire system of political correctness, which is so pervasive on our college campuses, educating our future leaders. But there's this whole, you know, we're really being controlled and manipulated by this system, by this agenda, by this worldview, which people like Bill and Hillary Clinton really embody at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into everything. I mean, it's, you know, I've talked to so many people that, you know, they'll say they really love kids, and they'll have like, on their second kid, they'll say something like, I really wish I could have more, but it just would be so weird to have a, you know, and you're going, well, why would it be weird? And then they'll say, well, but that's just not what we do nowadays. And you're like, why? And they don't realize that a lot of this has been through foundations that have put pressure on media to present certain themes. So even the effective fertility of the population.
Oh, it's very true. We used to have much larger families, but we've been conditioned today for women to think, oh, you know, if you have children, that's going to steal your career away from, that's going to hurt you in your pursuit of a career. Or we're being conditioned to think, oh, we better not multiply. The earth has too many people. It's going to cause, you know, every child you have, that's another carbon footprint, where it's going to cause climate change, it's going to destroy the world. And so sometimes people can't even, you know, really describe why they feel these things like you just mentioned. They just think, oh, we have one or two children and then we stop. That's what we do today. And they can't even explain to you why they believe something, but it's been bombarded into their heads, this worldview from so many directions and so many hours per day through the television, that they just come to adopt those things as their own beliefs and their own outlook on things.
Yeah, I used to ask students when dealing with the psychology of media, I would say, you know, how many of you can name 7 or 8 world leaders? And, you know, most of them, I mean, these are people that are 18, 19 years old. They couldn't name that many world leaders. But then I'd say, this was a few years ago, I'd say, how many of you can name 8 characters from the TV show Friends? Oh, every one of them could name, they could name even sub-characters. And that illustrates, you know, our TV is our reality now. And if you show people getting married at 40 and having one kid and, you know, and this kind of thing, that's what they incorporate as their worldview.
Oh, it's very true. So, I mean, we pick up on cues from these television shows, the values that are demonstrated by the movies, the television shows, the values that they reflect. We eventually adopt them as our own. And watching television is a very passive experience. You know, it's not, most people are not actively engaged in it. They're just kind of sitting there soaking it in. And once you soak in tens of thousands of hours of something, it is going to have a dramatic influence on you, no matter, you know, how much we want to deny it or say that we think for ourselves. If you feed tens of thousands of hours into your brain of something, it's going to change the way that you think.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You don't have to read Bernays' work, Propaganda, to know that. Hey, let's get on to I just, you know, the economy. You turn on network news, and they will tell you how things are improving, but I look out and you know, you go into small towns and even medium-sized cities, and you see areas that 10 years ago were vibrant, and they're falling apart. No, you know, shops are closed, they haven't reopened. What's going on? Is there a message that's going out, or you know, that's masking reality, or you know, is there really an economic recovery, or are we getting actually worse than we were?
Yeah, it's my opinion that things are actually getting worse. Now, a lot of people, they seem to treat the stock market like some type of barometer for the economy. The stock market's been going up. In October had a great month after, we had that shaking and went back up. People thought, well, the economy was doing good. Stock market's really surging. But, really the stock market has become totally divorced from economic reality. And right now it's my contention that we have actually entered a global recession. For example, the largest bank in the Western world, British banking giant HSBC, they recently came out and they said global GDP expressed in US dollars, if you would convert all economic activity around the world into US dollars, it's actually down 3.4% so far in 2015 compared to last year. So a lot less economic activity is taking place. Total global trade is down 8.4%. So a whole lot less stuff is being shipped around the world, the trade with one another. Real economic activity is way down. You look at the engine of global economic growth, China, their exports were down in September 3.7% from a year ago. Their imports were down 20.4% compared to a year ago. Way down. Demand for Chinese steel is down 8.9% compared to last year. Chinese rail freight volume is down 10.1%. And then the Chinese containerized freight index is at the lowest level ever recorded, even compared to the last recession. So at this time of the year, China should be sending us tons and tons of stuff for the holiday season, but we're not seeing that. In fact, there's, we're in the U.S. wholesale sales in the U.S. have fallen to the lowest level since the last recession. Wholesalers are not selling to retailers. Retailers are sitting on tons of inventory. In fact, the inventory to sales ratio has risen to the highest level since the last recession. Lots and lots of unsold stuff sitting out there. Here in the U.S., we've seen U.S. exports are down 11% for the year so far. Barack Obama said he was going to increase exports. Instead, they're way, way down. The amount of stuff being shipped around our country by truck, rail, and air combined, the cash shipping index, has been falling every single month on a year-over-year basis since March. So that's real economy, stuff being sent around the country. The ISM manufacturing index, the most important measurement of U.S. manufacturing activity, has fallen for 4 months in a row. That screams recession. The Dallas Fed's manufacturing outlook has dropped for 10 months in a row. So all these numbers, which I just shared with you, they're measuring real economic activity, and they're all saying, this is recession. We're entering a recession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said about the stocks just real quick, I have an analogy that when just an average person looks at the stock market to tell you how healthy the economy is, it would be like if you're a cow and you're noticing the farmer is building a new addition to his house thinking, wow, things are good. Look, the farm is getting better. Where you're not benefiting from that. The average worker is not benefiting from various financial corporations, giants, investing in each other to make more money. There's no new jobs. There's no production taking place.
It's very true. In order to be a healthy economy, you've got to make stuff, and you've got to have, which puts people to work and which creates wealth. But, we've sent millions of jobs out of the country. Technology is replacing millions of jobs. And so today, people are really struggling. That we've had these service jobs, these part-time jobs, which have kind of come in and replaced. But let's talk about jobs for a second. In the United States today, this is according to brand new numbers that just came out from the Social Security Administration, 51% of all American workers make less than $30,000 a year. So that's over half of all workers. And those are people fortunate enough to actually have a job. When you take the number of Americans that are officially unemployed, which is 7.9 million, and you add that to the number of Americans which are considered to be quote unquote not in the labor force, which is 94.7 million, you get a grand total of 102.6 million working age Americans that do not have a job right now. And of course, some of them are going to school. Some of them, want to stay home with the kids or whatever. But still, that's a record high. That's a huge number. And, John Williams over at shadowstats.com, he looks at what the unemployment rate would look like if honest numbers were being used, if it was the way that it was calculated in the old days. According to him, if the government was actually using honest numbers, instead of 5.1%, the unemployment rate right now would actually be 22.9%, and people would be talking about that we're in another Great Depression. They'd be talking about Obama's depression instead of Obama's, quote, recovery. And we're starting to see another downturn in the job situation. According to Challenger Gray, layoffs at major firms have risen to the highest level that we've witnessed since 2009. So more layoffs, and the number of job openings is declining. According to CNBC, the number of job openings in the United States declined by 5.3% during the month of August. So we're starting to, and this is what we would expect to see if we're going into a recession. So a lot of these fundamental economic numbers are giving us a really disturbing message right now.
Yeah, and I would like people to think about this. Most people don't think about the Depression. They don't think about history anymore. They don't teach history really in public schools anymore in America. But if you think about the recession, they had no food stamps. And you had the soup lines, and you see those pictures of people standing in the street for maybe a whole city block waiting to get a breakfast or something. Imagine if we did not have food stamps right now. And then also, I have to think, I think the reason Obama expanded the food stamp program, a lot of people think it was pragmatic, get more people on the government, dole. But I think also it might have been a way to kind of forestall any problems, in the sense that if the economy is going down, you don't want people suddenly not having food on the table, and a significant proportion of them. So this may be kind of a pacification of the population.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And so we've seen, this dependence on the government rise to unprecedented levels. And, just before the last recession in 2007, about 1 out of every 8 children in America was on food stamps. But now today, when we supposedly recovered, that number is 1 out of every 5 children in America is on food stamps. So we're seeing this huge dependence on the government. But in addition, even with the unprecedented dependence on the government, more Americans than ever are using food banks. There was a recent article, AP article, distributed all over the mainstream media that said that 46 million Americans use food banks every year. And there's some food banks in the United States today where we are seeing those bread lines, those food lines. In fact, it was reported that the lines start forming at some food banks here in this country as early as 6:30 in the morning, because people want to get there before the food runs out. That's how much people are hurting. Or you look at the number of homeless children. Number of homeless children in the United States has increased by 60% over the past 6 years. So that's from, when the recession supposedly ended to today. Instead of things getting better, no, poverty's getting worse. Increased by 60% number of homeless children. And then according to Poverty USA, 1.6 million American children slept either in a homeless shelter or some other form of emergency housing last year. So we've got, at the low end of the spectrum, the people that are hurting the most, it's getting worse. Poverty is exploding, so I really don't understand how people can say, oh, things are getting better, certainly not at the low end of the spectrum.
Well, I know a teacher, a high school teacher in America, and he wanted to earn a little, he just wanted to earn a little extra money. He and his wife were planning on doing some, I don't know, I don't remember what it was, but they needed to earn a few thousand extra. So he volunteered that maybe during his summer break, he would just get a job, any job, even delivering pizzas or something like that, just to bring in some extra money so they could use it that year. And the interesting thing was, he gave up after about a month of applying to dishwashing, waiter, pizza delivery, and he kind of, he made it look like on his application that he wasn't working anymore. So it wasn't like they just said, oh, well, no, you've got a job. We don't need to give you a job. And he said it really opened his eyes. And, I think that people are actually out there, that have good jobs now, but if they actually went out there and tried to get a job, like the kind of jobs they had in high school, they'd be really shocked that they can't get them now.
Oh, it's true. People are really hurting. And so we're seeing the middle class decline. For example, traditionally owning a home has been a signal that you're part of the middle class. And so, if the middle class is doing well, we'd expect more people to own a home. If the middle class is hurting, we'd expect the rate of home ownership to go down. Well, during the last recession, of course, the rate of home ownership started to fall. As people, they lost their homes, they couldn't afford a home, so the percentage of Americans that own a home started to decline. And that's happened in recessions throughout our history. But a funny thing happened. The recession supposedly ended, but the rate of home ownership kept going down and down and down and down. And now it's declined for 8 years in a row. Now, if things are getting better for the middle class, why is that happening? So many people, 62% of all Americans are living paycheck to paycheck as people just scratch and claw trying to make it from month to month. And at this point, 25% of all Americans have a negative net worth. That means that if you have no debt and you have a single dollar in your pocket, you're wealthier than a quarter of the entire country. So that's how much people are hurting. And that's why so many people are having to turn to become dependent on the government. In fact, according to this is right from the Census Bureau, 65% of all children in the entire country live in a home that receives some form of aid from the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that perhaps the reason why now, you've got people, well, maybe you could expect this from these kind, you got your Lindsey Grahams and your, John McCain's and stuff. You kind of expect them to be rattling the saber all the time. But you got Obama simultaneously poking at Russia and poking at China. And to the point that I just read from one of the Chinese sources that they said, the whole thing with the ship sailing through, near their islands, that they're not afraid of war. And I'm like, whoa, this was not the kind of talk they had there back in Ronald Reagan's day, where you got Russians and Chinese actually saying, well, if there's a war, do you think are they just crazy and they actually want a war? Or do you think it has to do with just taking people's attention off of how bad the economy is right now?
Well, I really do believe that Obama is exhibiting behavior that may be regarded as mentally unstable. I honestly do. Certainly with what China is doing in the South China Sea, there's questions and there's concerns about it, as that do they have a legitimate right to those islands? But there's other ways to handle it. What the Chinese said in advance, if the U.S. shales, if we sailed right past those islands, that they might start shooting at us. So they warned us in advance. And so Obama's like, instead of talking with them, trying to handle it some other ways, he said, well, let's go send a ship sailing right by there and see if they start shooting, see if they, sparking a world war. And as you said, the Chinese are very deadly serious about this, and their government-run newspapers are talking about how they might have to fight a regional war with the United States, and how the relationship is breaking down, and this is perhaps the most important economic relationship in the world. You go to our stores, you pick up products, virtually everything it seems is made in China or somewhere else. And so, if our relationship with China breaks down, that's going to be a huge mess for the whole global economy. But basically provoking China, trying to act tough. I'm very concerned about this because this could really spiral out of control, because our relationship with China has gone bad in so many ways, with allegations of spying on both sides, charges of currency manipulation, which China is actually doing. But there's so many things which already had soured our relationship, and now this thing with these islands is really a big deal. Most Americans aren't thinking about it, though. Then Russia, it's even worse, where first we really upset the Russians with the whole thing in Ukraine. The Russian people are very, very angry about that. And now we're going to send lethal military aid in there. So Russians on one side are supplying the rebels on the one side, and then we're going to supply the new government in Kiev on the other side. Huge mess. Russian people, even before the whole thing in Syria, the Russian people were very, very upset. They took a opinion poll of the Russian people and found that more than 80% of them have a negative view of the United States, record high even than we saw during the Cold War. So, and then in Syria, supposedly the U.S. military had been in there for over a year, bombing ISIS, doing all this stuff. Well, then the Russians came in and started bombing, and the Russians had no problem finding tons of targets to bomb, command centers, weapons depots, all kinds of targets. And so my question is, why did the Russians have such a target-rich environment where they're bombing dozens and dozens of targets? Could the U.S. military not find them? Did the Obama administration not want them bombed? I mean, what's going on? Yeah, I know that some of them were not specifically considered to be ISIS, but it just seems very odd to me. And then the other thing is, now that the Russians are in there, they're bombing, they've got people on the ground. Well, the Obama administration said, well, we've got to go in there and assert our rights to things, even though the Syrian government has never given the U.S. permission to be in there. The U.S. government saying, no, we're going to get tough. So the Obama administration dropped 50 tons of weapons and ammunition behind the lines there in Syria to rebel groups fighting against the Syrian government, the exact people that the Russians are trying to get rid of. So that's kind of poking a finger in the Russians' eyes there. And now Obama's come out, even though he said for so long, no troops on the ground, no troops on the ground. Now he's saying, yeah, we are going to have people on the ground in.
Okay, you left off at people on the ground. I'll start the recording again.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. 3, 2, 1.
So we had all these promises from Barack Obama for so long. There would be no troops on the ground, no troops on the ground. We heard it over and over and over. But then instead, now that's exactly what he's doing. He's sending troops not only into Iraq, but into Syria. They say there's going to be people on the ground fighting ISIS. Well, they could end up operating in the exact same areas that the Russians are operating in, or that the Russians are bombing. I mean, this is another example of how Barack Obama is poking the Russians in the eyes, getting them upset. And this has been happening for years, where our relationship with Russia is totally broken down. And so my concern is, okay, where things with China are going south, things with Russia are going south. This really seems to me to be putting us on a path toward potentially World War III. Now, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week. But down the road, we're headed down a very, very dangerous path, I think. And Barack Obama seems to not be able to settle these problems with the great superpowers by talking. And instead, he seems to have become extremely arrogant and feels like he can just push people around, do whatever he wants. And I'm very concerned about where this is eventually taking us.
Well, I think one of the things that's kind of scary is the idea that, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, never diagnosed the guy, but the thing is, he seems to exhibit a lot of the traits of like a malignant narcissist. And whereas that may sound better than a psychopath or sociopath, a psychopath knows when to, if they're playing cards, they know when to fold. And they know what to do because everything they do is part of a strategy. A narcissist, on the other hand, gets mad and kicks the table over. That's the difference between a narcissist and a psychopath. And if he's displaying characteristics, if you just type in Google, type in narcissism and Obama, there's people out there that are saying this kind of thing. That can be very dangerous because that means he's taking any opposition to him personally. And it's not a persona, it's not a goal, but it would be his persona itself would be, personally, what I mean by that is that, it would be like a child who's told, you don't do this. Well, the child cries and thinks you've just been mean to them. And if that's the case, that's something to really worry about. And some of the speeches he's been giving lately has been kind of scary because he's kind of exhibiting some bizarre behavior. I mean, you've noticed, right?
Oh, I definitely have. I think you've hit the nail right on the head. And now when it was just his political opponents here in this country, and it appears to me that he kind of, sent the IRS after his political opponents and things in this nation. Well, that's not going to cause World War III. That's a problem for individuals and groups, and it's not a good thing, certainly for our system. But when you start treating other powers and people with nuclear weapons that way, well, that is a major problem, because if we have a war or a war erupts in the Middle East, a major regional war or anything of that nature, well, the whole global economy can break down very, very rapidly. It can affect the entire planet. So when it was just about playing political games inside our country and people didn't like Obama and Obama took it personally, that's one thing. But when you're talking the global stage and war and everything else, that's a whole nother thing entirely.
Mm-hmm. And I'd encourage people to look at the history of World War One. And all the games. I mean, China and Russia are now like the Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. They're kind of in the same boat. They're up and coming, and that was seen as a threat by France and England at the time. And, it was more of an economic war. But I would say something that you said before about China, and that was the production. Our production is in China. Well, why did America beat Japan? The Japanese were very good fighters, but they didn't have an industrial base. America had the industrial base. They were able to turn out B-29 bombers. The Japanese lost a plane. They lost a plane. They couldn't replace it. America could replace 10 planes, the next day. We reverse that now with China. China produces, they have they do the production of the things that we need. Our military would run out of supplies if they could not rely on China. NASA could not put a payload into space without Russian rockets now.
That's so bizarre to me, and this has been a big thing for me for years. For example, just look at the city of Detroit. At one time, it was the greatest manufacturing city in the history of the world. And at one time, it's hard to believe now, but the city of Detroit, they actually had the highest per capita income in the entire country at one time, Detroit. But now it's a total mess. People are moving away. Unemployment is out of control. Crime is rampant, and it's a rotting, decaying shadow of its former self. It's become a joke to the rest of the world. The city of Detroit, and on a smaller scale, it really is reflective of what's going on with our society as a whole. And so, yeah, we've enjoyed the flood of cheap products coming in from China. We can go to the dollar store or Walmart and fill up our carts with tons and tons of incredibly cheap products. And it raises our standard of living temporarily. But meanwhile, we've lost tens of thousands of businesses. We've lost millions of good manufacturing jobs, and our ability to even create things for our own national defense. As you mentioned, we rely on certain things from China or elsewhere, which is absolutely insane because they're our potential opponents. So it is something that's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time, but neither the Republicans or the Democrats want to do anything about it.
Well, it seems like they're caught up in their own. You take a look at the Republican leadership right now. When you got like Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi talking, making positive comments about Paul Ryan being that's right, yeah, it's Paul Ryan getting put in as House Speaker. It's a club. They go to the same country clubs together. They don't hang out I was saying it's very true. Or just look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
who are the people that were working so hard to get Barack Obama fast-track negotiating authority so they could finalize that agreement? It was the Republican. The Republican leadership was really pounding the table, working very hard to try to help Obama get this treaty moving forward, and this treaty is called Obama Trade for a reason, because it's very much his treaty, and it was the Republicans who were paving the way for him.
Yeah, and the thing is that I don't know if the Europeans actually, the TTIP, their version of the Trans-Pacific, they have a lot of laws against GMOs. They have a lot of laws about that you can't really have the factory farm situations you have in America, where you mistreat animals. And, I don't know if it gives you any better quality of meat or anything, but they just pack them in. They have laws against that in much of Europe. But if you pass a trade bill like that, American firms can sue the governments of those countries and say that their legislation is violating their ability to do business.
It's very true. So it kind of internationalizes things, takes the power out of, local populations or national populations, and kind of internationalizes it, globalizes it, centralizes it. And that's the big trend. Almost every solution that's being promoted these days, it seems, involves more globalization, more centralization, more power in the hands of the elite, and less power in our hands. And so, yeah, it's not a good thing, but this is how the elite like to operate.
Yeah, but it benefits them. The people that own the corporations, they're not worried about the small town where they're going to shut down their operations. They're not worried about the farmers, that they're buying out all the land and then putting it under, factory farm situations. And I don't think they're really concerned that much about the American population's health. They're concerned with the bottom line. There's a documentary out there. I think it might actually be called The Corporation, where they go through the 12 characteristics of a psychopath or something like that, and they apply it to modern corporations. It fits really well.
Oh, it's true. And our founding fathers warned against this, actually. They warned against too much power in the central government, the national government, which we've seen happen. And they also warned against too much power with these giant corporations, which they were very suspicious of. They wanted power to be in the hands of average citizens. They wanted power to be dispersed as much as possible. Well, when you get these huge concentrations of power, whether it's the government or these huge corporations, then, it's hard for the average individual to, the interaction between, you and me and a giant corporation, or you and me and a giant federal government, the mismatch, the balance of power it creates some huge problems. So our founding fathers really wanted power to be dispersed as widely as possible, and for the balance to really be shifted in the direction of the individual and the family and small businesses. But instead, we've seen the balance of power go totally the other way. Now, almost all power in our society belongs to government or to big corporations, and as individuals, that we're really hurting.
Yeah, I think it was Jimmy Carter last year or the year before? He actually said America was an oligopoly; it wasn't a democracy anymore.
Yeah, and then the elite, the big corporations, the wealthy, they fund the campaigns, of these politicians, and the politician with the most money usually wins, statistics have shown. And so they get into office, they want to be good to the people who put them there, and they know that they got there because of the money. And so it's a system that kind of feeds in on itself. Oh,
absolutely, absolutely. Hey, we're coming short on time here. You got to come back on later. Seriously, this has been really informative for my audience. How do people find it? How do they find your website?
Yeah, if it's theeconomiccollapseblog.com, or if you just go to Google and type in The Economic Collapse, it's the first result that comes up. My other primary website where I write about a broader range of things is endoftheamericandream.com. Then I also have a couple of books. One's a novel, The Beginning of the End, paints a picture of kind of what life is going to be like in America in the years ahead, as the economy starts to fall apart. And then the other book is entitled Get Prepared Now. Both of those can be found on Amazon.com.
Okay, excellent, excellent. I really encourage people to look into this and also to inform other people. Share these kinds of websites with people. You may think that, they're not really worried about that. But the thing I like about your website is it's professional. You don't have a lot of, big, blaring, colorful, like some sort of ad type thing. It's just straight to the point, and I really like that.
Well, I'm just trying to do the best that I can, and a lot of people enjoy it and respond and keep coming back. So I talk about some very difficult things, some very challenging things, and I thought by now I would have scared away all my audience. Instead, it keeps growing. So I'm very thankful for that, and thank you so much for having me on today. I very much enjoyed our discussion.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on, and hopefully we will talk to you later. Okay, welcome back.